Beneath your feet, beneath the cities and forests, the deserts and shorelines, lie worlds that once breathed, spoke, and dreamed. Civilizations, not just forgotten, but erased, not by war or rebellion, not even by time alone, but by something quieter, something more complete, the silence of forgetting. Tonight we drift backward, not through written history, but through the spaces before writing began. This is not the realm of emperors or empires you studied in school. No Roman columns, no pyramids of Giza, no scrolls sealed in clay. This is a realm of shadow civilizations, the kind that existed when Earth herself was younger, her skin, not yet etched with the scars of cities, but humming with the soft breath of primal memory. There is a haunting beauty to this forgotten world. For most of us, the past begins with the first page of a book, the cuneiform records of Sumer, the hieroglyphs of Egypt, the oracle bones of China. But what of the people who lived before we learned to record? Were their lives less meaningful, their worlds less vibrant, simply because no one wrote them down? We assume the absence of evidence means the absence of civilization, but perhaps the only thing that's truly missing is our imagination. Beneath the oceans, buried under sand dunes, and cradled in mountain valleys, lie the remnants of cities that predate our definitions of civilization, foundations smoothed by time, walls swallowed by earth, temples aligned with stars whose meanings we no longer know. Their builders are silent, but the stones are not. If you've ever stood alone in nature, in the stillness of a quiet forest, or by the side of a misty mountain lake, you may have felt it, that presence, that quiet hum beneath the silence. That is the voice of the past. It does not shout. It does not explain itself. It waits. Archaeologists dig through layers of soil, historians piece together fragments of pottery, tools, and bone. But what they find are only echoes, whispers, a burnt offering here, a bone needle there, a wall of stones, arranged just so. These are puzzle pieces, scattered across time's vast table, and the picture they form is always incomplete. Yet even in that incompleteness, something profound emerges. It is the realization that we are not the first to gather under stars, not the first to build temples, not the first to wonder what lies beyond death, and not the first to forget. This story, the story you're about to hear, is not about kings and queens, not about dates and treaties. It is a lullaby for lost worlds, a quiet reverence for cultures that bloomed in the dark, without needing a spotlight, a tribute to the genius of unknown ancestors, whose names we will never pronounce. They shaped stones before there were chisels. They sang songs before there were notes. They mapped the stars before compasses ever turned. And then, like the final sigh of a dream, they were gone, vanished, not because they failed, but because the earth moved on. Rivers changed course, seas rose, forests reclaimed their lands, sand swallowed cities whole, and memory, the fragile thread of all legacy, frayed into nothingness. But what if traces remain? What if beneath your very home, beneath cities like London, Istanbul, or Lima, lie entire forgotten worlds, layered like sediment? What if we've barely scratched the surface of what humanity once was, and what it may have lost? This documentary is a journey into that possibility. We will walk through temples buried beneath time, explore ruins older than the written word, and float over islands that no longer exist. You'll hear of civilizations that challenge the very timeline of human history, and ones that are known only by the myths they left behind. There will be mystery and awe, but not urgency, not suspense. This is not a race to solve, it's a slow unfolding, a breathing space. An invitation to let your mind drift into the warm night of the distant past, where the stars shone brighter, and the world held fewer answers. So rest your head, loosen your thoughts. Let the winds of prehistory wrap around you like soft linen. We are not beginning with a known world, we are slipping into the mist, where voices echo in unknown tongues, where fires burned in the hearts of lost cities, and where the fog of time cradles civilizations that vanished long before the first story was ever written. The earth is ancient, history is short. And somewhere, between those two truths, lie the civilizations that disappeared before history began. We often believe that history is a clear window into the past, a steady thread connecting us to everything that came before. But what if that thread is not a rope, but a spider's silk, fragile, selective, invisible, to those who don't know how to look? History, as we define it, is young. It began only when humans started writing things down, etching clay tablets in Sumer, carving symbols into Egyptian tombs, inking scrolls in the hands of ancient scholars. Before that, we call it prehistory, a placeholder for what we do not understand, a grey fog we rarely question. But prehistory is not empty. It is simply unwritten. Our textbooks begin around 5,000 years ago. Yet, Homo sapiens, as a species, has walked this earth for over 300,000 years. That means 95% of our story is missing from the official record, not because nothing happened, but because no one wrote it down. Imagine a novel where only the final chapter remains. Imagine judging a civilization's genius by what they happened to carve into stone, or what happened to survive a flood, a fire, or 1,000 years of erosion. What we call the beginning of civilization is merely the beginning of writing. Before that, civilizations lived, thrived, and vanished in complete silence, not because they were primitive, but because their voices have been buried, drowned, or scattered. And so, we live in a house of mirrors. The walls reflect what survived, not what once was. Consider this: if an advanced culture flourished 20,000 years ago, but left no writing, no metal, no skyscrapers, would we believe it ever existed? If rising seas swallowed its cities, and forests reclaimed its roads, what would remain? Perhaps a foundation stone, misidentified as a natural rock, or a story passed down as a myth, dismissed as fantasy. The earth is skilled at hiding things. Time is a patient eraser. Our modern view of ancient people is often shaped by a quiet arrogance. We imagine them as stumbling in darkness, discovering fire, huddled in caves, and yet, some ancient structures, like the astronomical precision of Nabata Playa, or the engineering feats of Göbekli Tepe, suggest knowledge that defies our assumptions. Were they primitive, or have we simply lost the ability to understand their language, not their spoken words, but their architectural grammar, their cosmic alignments, their sacred geometries? This section of our journey is not about what we know, it is about recognizing the borders of knowledge, borders we once drew in chalk, only to find that rain has smudged them. Let us pause and imagine a time before timekeeping, before calendars, kings or coins. A mother sings to her child by the fire. A village carves sacred symbols into stone. Hunters look to the stars, not just to mark the seasons, but to understand the soul. These are not nameless brutes. These are humans, us, with fears, dreams, rituals, and stories that echoed through thousands of years, and then disappeared. And yet, some traces remain, in oral traditions passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, in cave paintings that still pulse with life, in ceremonial sites aligned to solstices, no longer worshipped. These are not random relics, they are memory, fragmented, blurred, but deeply human. Still, modern systems of knowledge often treat myth and memory as unreliable. If it's not in a book, if it's not in a museum, it doesn't count. But must history be written to be real? Is a song less true because no one recorded it? Is a dream less meaningful because it fades by morning? There is an old saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, yet we treat the silences in our timeline as proof that nothing happened there. We ignore the shadows, simply because they don't fit the light we've chosen to shine. Perhaps the truth is not missing. Perhaps it is hiding in plain sight, in stories of floods that exist across every culture, in inexplicable ruins that defy categorization, in symbols carved across continents by people who supposedly never met. There is a deeper story here, one not told in books, but in stone, in soil, in stars. History has limits, but curiosity does not. In this journey, we will cross the boundaries of what is accepted and step into what is possible, not to declare certainty, but to listen gently for forgotten truths. Because if we can learn to read the earth, not as a textbook, but as a living palimpsest, we might begin to understand the civilizations that breathed before the page ever turned. As we leave this section behind, let the thought settle softly. History is not the story of everything that happened. It is the story of everything we remember, and memory has its own rules. High on a hill in southeastern Turkey, surrounded by rolling plains and ancient winds, lies a place so old, it rewrote the beginning of civilization. Discovered in the late 20th century, but built more than 11,000 years ago, Göbekli Tepe is the oldest known monumental structure created by human hands. And yet, it remains almost entirely silent. No texts, no graves, no villages. Just a sacred circle of towering stones, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and more mysterious than both. The name Göbekli Tepe means pot-belly hill. From a distance, that's all it was thought to be, a gentle rise in the earth, covered in grass and thyme. But beneath that hill was an ancient secret, massive T-shaped limestone pillars, carved and arranged in perfect circular enclosures, some weighing more than 20 tons. No metal tools, no wheels, no domesticated animals, just human hands, and a purpose lost to history. Each pillar is carved with creatures, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, scorpions, lions, not chaotic, but deliberate. Some animals are shown watching, others are mid-movement, dancing around the edge of time. Some scholars believe these carvings represent a cosmic mythology, a sacred bestiary of a vanished belief system. Others whisper that this was an observatory, aligned with stars we barely remember. But the greatest mystery isn't what we see, it's when it was built. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture. It was constructed not by farmers, but by hunter-gatherers, and this simple fact changes everything we thought we knew. For decades, archaeologists believed civilization began with farming, that people settled down, grew crops, and then over time, began to build temples and cities. But Göbekli Tepe flips that script. It suggests the opposite, that spiritual belief may have come first, that ancient people built temples, and only afterward gathered enough to need agriculture to sustain them. In other words, it wasn't grain that gave birth to gods, it was gods that may have given birth to grain. And then, just as mysteriously as it was built, it was buried. Sometime around 8000 BCE, the entire site was intentionally covered with dirt, stone, and rubble, not vandalized, not destroyed, preserved, carefully, deliberately hidden away, as if those who built it wanted it forgotten, or saved for someone far in the future. That is why Göbekli Tepe was found in such pristine condition, because it wasn't lost to time, it was sealed by design. But why? Was it a sacred retirement, a ritual closure of something too powerful to leave open, or was it an act of fear, burying something that was never meant to last? We may never know. The earth keeps her oldest secrets close to the bone, and beneath the surface, there's more. Archaeologists estimate that only 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Beneath the hill are dozens, perhaps hundreds of similar enclosures, still buried, still silent. The temple we see is only a whisper of what lies below, an introduction, a prologue to a story still waiting to be read. And so we ask, who were these builders? Where did they come from? What did they believe? They left no tools, no homes, no skeletons, only circles of stone, carved with reverence, placed with care. Some believe they were shamans, others suggest they were part of a migratory priesthood, people who traveled across lands, building ceremonial spaces for unknown rituals, aligned to seasonal stars or celestial gates. The pillars may have served as cosmic maps, or stargates, or spiritual anchors for a belief system lost to fire, flood, or forgetfulness. But one thing is clear: Göbekli Tepe was not random, it was planned, it was precise, and it was not alone. Nearby sites, like Karahan Tepe and Nivali Chori, suggest a wider sacred network, a cultural region where spiritual monumentality bloomed centuries before history began. These were not isolated anomalies, they were part of a deeper tradition, a hidden chapter of humanity. Perhaps one we were never meant to read, or perhaps one we've been summoned to remember. Let's pause here for a moment. Breathe slowly. Imagine 11,000 years ago, under a dark sky shimmering with unpolluted stars, firelight flickers on carved stone, a circle of figures stand in reverence. They wear no crowns, they carry no scrolls, but in their hands, the knowledge of the heavens. In their minds, stories older than language. They chant, they listen, they look to the sky. And then one day, they cover it all in earth, and they leave, leaving behind only questions. And so we arrive at Göbekli Tepe, not as tourists, not even as historians, but as dreamers, peering through time's keyhole into a world that should not exist, but does. A world where the sacred came before the stable, where myth was carved in stone, not words, where mystery was a beginning, not a problem to solve. This is not the first civilization, but it may be the first memory. As we move onward, deeper into the shadows of forgotten time, let the stones of Göbekli Tepe echo in your mind like a heartbeat from another world. The temple was never meant to explain itself, only to be witnessed, only to be felt. Beneath the warm waves of the Persian Gulf lies a silence deeper than the sea itself. A silence that may be hiding one of humanity's oldest forgotten homelands, a land that existed when the ocean was not an ocean, but a garden. Today, the Persian Gulf is a body of shimmering water, bordered by the deserts of Arabia and the fertile lands of Mesopotamia. But if we step back, far back, beyond the written word, we find that this sea was once something very different. At the end of the last ice age, around 14,000 to 8,000 years ago, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. What is now ocean floor was then exposed land, a lush, sprawling region with rivers, lakes, and possibly cities. This was the Gulf Oasis. Modern satellite imagery and bathymetric surveys reveal the shapes of ancient riverbeds beneath the Gulf, carved into the seafloor like fingerprints of a forgotten landscape. They show not just one, but multiple rivers, the ancient courses of the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Karun, and the mythical Wadi Batin. Together, they would have formed a fertile crescent within the Gulf itself, an ideal home for early humans. Imagine it: grassy plains, dotted with palm groves, rivers teeming with fish, communities rising on gently sloped hills, children playing by the water's edge, under a sky not yet split by borders or maps. But then, as the Ice Age ended, the glaciers melted, and the seas began to rise. Slowly, steadily, but relentlessly, the ocean advanced. Over generations, coastlines retreated, villages drowned, rivers transformed into seabeds, and the Gulf Oasis, once full of life, vanished beneath the waves. A submersion so complete, no trace was left on land. What remains is memory, or perhaps myth. In ancient Sumerian texts, among the earliest known writings in human history, there is a recurring theme, a primeval homeland called Dilmun, a sacred place of abundance where sickness did not exist. A place where the gods once walked beside mortals. Could this Dilmun, long debated, long displaced, have once existed not on land, but under the Gulf? Many scholars have linked Dilmun to Bahrain or eastern Saudi Arabia, but others have begun to look below the waterline, to the now submerged heart of the Gulf itself. It is there, some suggest, that the real cradle of Mesopotamian civilization may lie, a place that seeded the myths of Eden, paradise, and primordial beginnings. What we are left with is a tantalizing contrast. Above the water, dry sands blow across the Arabian desert. Below the water, there may be temples, hearths, tools, an entire life world sealed by salt and time. But how do we find a city lost beneath a sea? Traditional archaeology stumbles here. Excavation is nearly impossible without advanced underwater equipment and political coordination. The Gulf is shallow in parts, but vast and dynamic, a place not easily mapped by shovels and trowels, and so we turn to technology. Sonar scans, geological cores, remote sensing and myth. Because in the absence of visible ruins, we are left with stories, and the oldest stories, surprisingly, all seem to remember the flood. In the Sumerian epic of Ziusudra, a great deluge is sent by the gods to wipe clean the world. In the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the flood returns. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah sails through it, and in ancient India, a great fish warns Manu of an ocean that will rise and consume all. Across culture after culture, Mesopotamian, Persian, Dravidian, even Aboriginal Australian, the memory of a drowning persists, not a metaphor, a memory. One carried for thousands of years across generations, encoded into the spine of myth. Could all these stories be echoes of the Gulf Oasis, a place slowly swallowed, not in a single night, like Atlantis, but in centuries of rising tides, a slow apocalypse, where each generation moved a little farther inland, retreating from the sea that would not stop coming? The idea is not science fiction. It is now supported by growing geological data, and yet few speak of it. Few dig there, few even know to look, because it was gone before history began. Imagine again, you are a child in a riverside village near the ancient Gulf. Your grandfather speaks of stars, of spirits, of sacred rituals at the water's edge, and one day, the shoreline changes, again, and again, until the place he spoke of, the village of his youth, is gone, lost beneath the rising tide. You remember it only through his voice becomes your memory, and when you grow old, your memory becomes myth. Now, the waters are still, cargo ships cross the surface, oil pumps whir in the distance, and beneath all that modern noise lie the quiet ruins of a world we no longer know. Perhaps the Gulf Oasis was not a city like ours. Perhaps it left no gold, no monuments, no great library, but it may have left something greater. The first whispers of what would become civilization, the first shared rituals, the first temples built not to survive, but to mean something, even as they vanished. In the end, the Gulf may not yield its secrets easily. Its memories lie beneath sediment and secrecy. But the idea of the Gulf Oasis invites us to expand our lens to consider that the first cradles of humanity may not be in the dry sands of Mesopotamia, but beneath the seas that border them. We drift onward now, leaving the ocean behind and following the current of forgotten memory into another land, one across the globe, in South America, where pyramids rise not for gods of war, but for harmony and sound. We now arrive at the city of Caral, built without conflict in a place where music shaped stone. In the Supe Valley of coastal Peru, where dry desert meets a ribbon of green along a winding river, there lies a city so old it predates the Inca by 4,000 years, and yet it hums with a silence so profound, even time itself seems to pause there. This is Caral, the oldest known city in the Americas, built nearly 5,000 years before Machu Picchu, before the rise of Rome or Babylon, older than the pyramids of Egypt, and until recently, completely unknown. It was only in the 1990s that archaeologist Ruth Shady began to uncover the truth of this quiet marvel, a sprawling urban center of temples, plazas, and pyramids, forgotten under layers of sand and dust. What emerged was a portrait not of warriors or rulers, but of a peaceful people devoted to ceremony, music, and harmony. No weapons were found, no battlegrounds, no signs of conquest, only instruments, flutes made from the bones of condors and pelicans, and great pyramids that faced the stars. Unlike other ancient civilizations that seem to rise through domination, Caral appears to have risen through ritual. its people built with intention, not to glorify power, but to align with something greater, perhaps the cosmos, perhaps the river, perhaps something still unknown. At the heart of the city stands the main pyramid of Caral, built in stages, layer upon layer, each segment carefully planned and placed. Adjacent to it lies a sunken circular plaza, a perfect amphitheater, where hundreds could gather. For what? For songs, for astronomy, for a language that lived in rhythm instead of script. Even now, the city's purpose breathes softly through its bones. Caral challenges many assumptions. There is no pottery, no evidence of a written script, and yet there is geometry, mathematics, urban planning, engineering precision. How did a people with no wheel, no metal tools, and no writing construct a complex city aligned with solstices, wind patterns, and seismic safety? The builders of Caral used woven reed bags to carry stones. They used fiber ropes and wooden pegs to measure distances and align structures, and they used fire, carefully placed in ritual, to imbue meaning into space. They were neither primitive nor accidental. They were deliberate, aware, and gone, disappeared before history ever noticed. Yet the culture of Caral did not exist in isolation. Trade routes stretched from the Amazon to the coast, linking Caral to distant societies with goods like tropical fruits, colorful feathers, and marine shells. Their hands touched distant lands, their ideas perhaps spread even farther. But what they believed remains elusive. Some scholars suggest that music was central to their worldview, that the flutes and drums were not mere entertainment, but tools of communion, of ritual, of alignment. The city itself may have been an instrument designed to echo the harmony of the natural world. If so, then Caral was not just a city, it was a prayer made of stone. We so often define greatness by scale, by conquest, by technological dominance, but Caral offers a different story, one of coexistence, community, and the sacred silence of not needing to conquer in order to matter. There are no statues of kings, no halls of war, but there is architecture that breathes in harmony with the wind, and plazas that open not just to the sky, but to the invisible. The people of Caral lived with the land, not upon it. They built their city in rhythm with earthquakes, shaping their pyramids to absorb tremors rather than resist them. They observed the stars and used them to guide planting, festivals, and perhaps deeper mysteries we cannot yet name. They left no script to explain their beliefs, but perhaps they didn't need to. Not all civilizations leave behind scrolls, some leave a feeling. Standing at Caral today, in the heat of the desert sun, or under a moonlit sky, there is an unmistakable sense of presence, as if the stones themselves remember, as if the wind still carries the chords of forgotten music. And yet, for all its grandeur, Caral faded. The river that once gave life began to shift. Climate changed, trade routes weakened, crops struggled, and slowly the city emptied. Not through war, not through fire, but through silence. Its people left, perhaps gradually, perhaps ritually, and Caral was covered by time. When archaeologists arrived millennia later, they found not destruction, but preservation, and in that, a kind of gentle message that a civilization can thrive without conquest, that greatness can bloom in peace, that harmony too is worthy of remembering. The builders of Caral remind us that history is not only a story of power, but of possibility, that people long before us looked at the sky, felt the beat of drums, and built sacred spaces, not to dominate, but to listen. And now we listen too, to the sound of wind over stone, to the hush between the notes of a bone flute, to the memory of a people who shaped a world and walked away without burning it. As we step forward into the next chapter of our journey, from the dry deserts of Peru to the sunken coasts of ancient India, we carry with us this gentle paradox, that the oldest cities may speak the softest truths, and those who are forgotten may have known things we've only just begun to remember. Beneath the turquoise shimmer of the Indian Ocean lie ancient stories no longer told, not because they were forgotten, but because they were submerged. From the coasts of India to the shores of Sri Lanka, from Tamil Nadu's broken beaches to the coral reefs near Gujarat, echoes of a lost world hum beneath the tide. In the rhythm of crashing waves and the slow breath of shifting tides, there are whispers of temples, drowned cities, swallowed and civilizations claimed by the sea. This is not myth alone, though the myths knew it first. In ancient Hindu texts, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, there are references to mighty cities built along the ocean's edge, cities of dazzling wealth and radiant devotion. Among them is Dwarka, the sacred kingdom of Lord Krishna, said to be swallowed by the sea after his death. For centuries, these stories lived only in song and scripture, allegory, some said, legend, others claimed, until divers plunged into the waters off the coast of modern-day Dwarka, in Gujarat. There in the hazy depths, they found something solid, rows of stones laid with purpose, rectangular blocks carved and aligned, wall-like formations, enclosures, and step-like terraces, all sitting far below the modern shoreline, beneath layers of sediment, barnacles, and coral. Sonar scans showed geometric patterns, not the chaos of nature, but the order of architecture. Structures that appeared shaped by hands from long before recorded Indian history began. How old are these ruins? Some suggest over 9,000 years, others caution, saying they may be younger. But all agree, these underwater formations challenge our current maps of the past. They do not stand alone. To the south, off the coast of Mahabalipuram, in Tamil Nadu, ancient Tamil legends speak of the 7 pagodas, 6 magnificent temples lost to the sea, with only one remaining on land. For generations, this was poetry, until the tsunami of 2004, when ocean waves pulled back with devastating force and revealed, for a few short hours, stone structures beneath the waterline. Fishermen had always spoken of them, but no one had truly listened, until the sea unveiled them, as if offering a fleeting glimpse into what it had hidden for thousands of years. Divers and archaeologists returned to explore and found carved lions, stone steps, and remnants of ancient walls, confirming that Mahabalipuram once stretched farther into the ocean than anyone had believed. These submerged temples are not isolated marvels. They are pieces, fragments of a much larger drowned world, a world that may have flourished during a time of lower sea levels, when the Indian subcontinent extended farther and its coastal cultures lived not where we live now, but in the shadow of what is now sea. And then came the flood. At the end of the Ice Age, around 10,000 to 8,000 BCE, glacial melts caused catastrophic sea level rise. The ocean crept in, year after year. What was once land turned to swamp, swamps turned to bays, bays became ocean. The homes of priests, poets, and kings were swallowed slowly, leaving no bones, no scrolls, only stone and story. There is a strange tenderness in this idea, that the sea does not destroy as much as it absorbs. It takes, and it keeps, and it preserves, in its own cold, silent way. What remains is not ruins, but questions. Were these truly cities? Did they worship there, trade there, rule there? Or are these just geological formations, shaped by coincidence? Science moves slowly here, cautious, but myth moves differently. It carries emotional memory, and across India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia, the stories continue, stories of floods, vanished lands, sunken cities, where bells still toll beneath the water. In the Tamil tradition, there is a haunting legend of Kumari Kandam, a vast lost continent, south of India, home to a great civilization now buried beneath the ocean. Though often dismissed as mere folklore, some believe it may echo an ancestral memory of submerged coastal cultures, drowned not in days, but in centuries. What if these tales, long mocked as fantasy, are just blurred memories, accounts passed down through generations whose ancestors watched their world vanish? Perhaps the songs knew something we didn't. As we drift through this chapter of submerged cities, We are not seeking answers, but acknowledging possibilities, that history is not just what stands on land, but also what sleeps beneath the water, and perhaps the ocean has not finished speaking. Perhaps one day, with the right sonar, the right light, the right question, the Indian Ocean will tell us the full story. But for now, we listen to the sea, to the myths, to the gentle hush of waves, lapping over temples built for gods we've nearly forgotten. As we move on, from saltwater silence to sun-scorched sand, we journey to another forgotten cradle, a place not drowned by water, but buried by wind, where the Sahara once bloomed green and alive, and entire cultures vanished into dust. Today we know the Sahara Desert as a vast ocean of sand, dry, unbroken, and endlessly silent. Long before the desert became a graveyard of dunes, the Sahara was a lush savanna, a land of rivers, lakes, and grasslands, where herds of gazelles grazed under acacia trees, where hippos bathed in broad blue waters, and where humans built worlds now erased by time and sand. This period is known as the African Humid Period, a stretch of thousands of years beginning around 10,000 BCE, when monsoon rains drenched the Sahara, transforming it into one of the most fertile regions on Earth. For over 5,000 years, the Sahara was not a desert, but a place of life, a cradle of early civilization. We know this not through ruins alone, but through rock art. Thousands of painted and carved figures stretch across sandstone caves and cliffs, from Algeria to Chad, Libya to Niger, a silent gallery left by hands long gone. The images are vivid: graceful cattle, giraffes walking in procession, swimmers in rivers now vanished, scenes of community, ritual, and joy. These are not the doodles of wandering tribes. They are cultural expressions, layered, symbolic, telling stories of a people who knew this land as home. In places like the Tassili Naja Plateau in Algeria, these artworks are so numerous, so detailed, that some archaeologists call it an encyclopedia in stone, a library not of books, but of walls and color, carrying the memory of a time when human imagination bloomed alongside vegetation. But beyond art, there is architecture. Scattered across the Sahara are stone monuments, megalithic alignments, burial mounds, and ancient tombs. In Niger, the site of Gabbero tells the haunting story of a long-lost people who lived beside a great lake, the Kifian culture, who thrived as fisherfolk and artisans around 8,000 years ago. Their graves are some of the oldest in the region, their bodies buried with care, with jewelry, with tools. In one grave, a woman and 2 children lie in eternal embrace, their bones dusted with red ochre, a quiet testimony to love, mourning, and human presence. And then the rains began to fade, the lakes began to dry, the grass turned yellow, and the Sahara began to die. But it did not die all at once, it transformed. As the desert expanded, civilizations adapted. In the north, early urban centers emerged near oases, like Garamantes, in what is now Libya. These people dug vast underground channels, tapping deep aquifers, to sustain life in an increasingly hostile environment. They built cities, traded with Carthage and Rome, and ruled desert kingdoms, long before their names were carved into European maps. And then they too were forgotten, buried not by time, but by sand. The Sahara is more than sand dunes. It is a cemetery of cities, a place where wind replaces memory, where what was once loud with life is now silent, with forgetting. But some memories rise again, uncovered by archaeologists, hinted at in genetic traces, echoed in oral traditions. Tribes still sing of ancient ancestors, who lived in green lands before the desert came. Some elders recall stories of rivers that no longer flow, of forests where camels now tread. These are not fictions, they are fragments of human resilience, of adaptation, of loss, and perhaps of warning, because the Sahara tells us something more than history. It reminds us that climate can erase civilization, that what is fertile today may vanish tomorrow, that a people's memory can be buried under something as simple as sand, and as powerful as time. What haunts us is not that these civilizations disappeared, but that they disappeared so quietly. There were no wars that we know of, no disasters written in stone, just a slow retreat, as the rain stopped falling, as the herds moved on, as the wells dried up, the cities emptied. The songs faded, and the desert grew. Even now, when you stand in the heart of the Sahara, it is hard not to feel the presence of something older, not ghosts exactly, but shadows of memory, the outline of a well where water no longer flows, the shape of a wall half consumed by shifting dunes, the echo of footsteps that once walked where no path remains. This was not the end. The people of the Sahara didn't vanish, they migrated. Many became the ancestors of cultures we know today in West Africa, the Sahel, and beyond. But the civilizations themselves, their architecture, their gods, their language, are now part of the Earth's forgotten library, a library without a librarian, a story that can only be read in sand, bone and stone. As we leave the Sahara behind, we carry with us a new understanding that some of the world's oldest cities left no maps, no scrolls, only art-aligned stars, and stones stacked in the breath of deserts. We now travel to a much smaller place, not a land of deserts, but an island, and not above ground, but beneath it. To Malta, where an ancient structure still murmurs in echoes, and where sound once moved through chambers, like light through stained glass, we now descend into the Hypogeum, a temple carved below the earth. Beneath the surface of the island of Malta, past the dust of the present, and into the cool breath of stone, there lies a place carved, not from ambition, but from stillness. It is called the Hypogeum of Al-Safliani, a temple beneath a temple, a world beneath a world, and it whispers in frequencies we can barely hear. Discovered by accident, in 1902 during construction, the Hypogeum revealed itself like a secret that had waited too long to be told. What the workers uncovered was not a cave, but an entire subterranean structure, a complex network of passageways, chambers, altars, and hollows, all carved directly from solid limestone by hand more than 5,000 years ago. There are no windows, no natural light ever touches these walls, and yet, inside this darkness, there is harmony. 3 levels stretch into the earth. The deepest chamber lies over 30 feet below the surface. No bricks, no beams, just raw stone sculpted by unknown tools into perfect curvature. Walls that breathe, ceilings that resonate, floors that remember. But it is not the architecture alone that stirs something ancient in the listener. It is what the Hypogeum does with sound. In one chamber, known now as the Oracle Room, a deep male voice, spoken aloud at certain frequencies, begins to vibrate the stone. The sound grows, reverberates, amplifies, until it feels as though the entire room is humming with sacred energy, not loud, not chaotic, but whole. Some believe this was intentional, that the space was designed to enhance trance states, to carry prayer not outward but inward, into the soul. Others suggest that ritual chanting here could cause the body itself to vibrate, creating a union between sound, architecture, and spiritual vision. What is certain is that this room responds, not to light, not to symbols, but to the human voice. A whisper lingers longer here, a breath travels farther. The walls do not echo, they hold. This is not a tomb, though over 7,000 human remains were once found inside. This is not a palace, though its symmetry rivals any court. This is something else, something we do not yet understand. Many scholars believe the Hypogeum was a temple complex, a site of initiation, death rituals, or metaphysical passage. The curved chambers resemble a womb, suggesting themes of rebirth rather than finality. Some walls are painted in spiral motifs, red ochre patterns looping endlessly, like galaxies turning, like thoughts without end. And unlike most megalithic sites, the Hypogeum is not for the eyes. It is not meant to be seen. It is meant to be felt. There is no sky here, no sun, only inner vision. What makes it even more strange is its isolation. There is no writing, no iconography, no clear connections to outside cultures, and yet it appears in the same Neolithic time frame as other mysterious megaliths around the world: Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Newgrange in Ireland, the temples of Malta above ground, all aligned to solstices, star patterns, or cycles of life and death. Some researchers have dared to ask, were these ancient cultures more connected than we believe? Were they building according to an older shared knowledge, now lost? The Hypogeum gives no answers, only silence, and deep beneath the feet of modern Malta, that silence is sacred. When it was first explored, archaeologists found something even more unsettling. Among the many skeletons were several skulls, elongated, unusual in shape. Some claimed they were the result of ritual cranial shaping, others whispered of something more alien, more speculative. The debate was never resolved. Some of the skulls went missing. The mystery only deepened. And so the Hypogeum remains one of the most enigmatic structures on Earth, not because we haven't studied it, but because it refuses to be understood. Perhaps that is its gift. Perhaps it was never meant to be explained, only entered a space to return to something ancient within us, a place where the living could commune with the invisible, and where the boundary between this world and another became permeable. Today, only a few visitors are allowed inside each year. The air is tightly regulated, the vibration carefully preserved. The bones are gone, but the voice of the place remains, a resonance, a frequency, a memory without a name. As we ascend again, gently like pilgrims emerging from a dream, we carry with us that echo, that sound which cannot be recorded, only remembered. And now we move northward, into colder winds and deeper speculation. We travel to a realm where land once existed beneath the glaciers, and where entire civilizations may have vanished, not by war or water, but by ice. We now approach the next enigma, the Arctic origins theory, a place where forgotten coastlines, buried continents, and the melt of memory await their quiet telling. Cold holds memory, in a way heat cannot. Where fire devours, ice preserves. And so in the northernmost realms of our planet, where sunlight is fleeting, and silence hangs like breath in the air, there may lie the oldest stories never told, frozen beneath permafrost, buried under glaciers, drifting with the polar winds, but still whisper across ancient shorelines. Tonight we journey into the speculative, into a theory that is not written in textbooks, but lives on the fringe of accepted history. A theory that humanity's origins, or at least one forgotten branch of it, may trace not to the equator, but to the Arctic. It begins, as many mysteries do, with an anomaly. Around the edges of the Arctic Circle, in Siberia, Alaska, Greenland, and the far north of Canada, indigenous oral traditions speak of ancient ancestors who once lived in a warm green Arctic, not as wandering hunters, but as settled people. People with structure, with memory, with knowledge. According to these stories, there was a time, long before the sky dimmed, when the North was not a place of exile, but a place of origin. Could it be true? We now know that during parts of the Pleistocene epoch, the Arctic was not always the barren ice desert we see today. In certain interglacial periods, parts of it were warmer, temperate, even lush. Fossilized remains of forests, mammals, and even subtropical flora have been found in places where today nothing grows. In Yakutia, mammoth bones lie in dense clusters, preserved perfectly in the frozen soil. In Greenland, ancient DNA suggests that butterflies and coniferous trees once fluttered and stretched where now only snow lies. And in some rare places, submerged coastlines hint at the footprints of long-lost settlements, now buried under ocean and ice. But these are only the geological echoes. The human echoes are stranger still. In 1906, a man named Bal Gangadhar Tilak, an Indian scholar and astronomer, published a controversial idea in his book, The Arctic Home in the Vedas. Drawing from the ancient Rig Veda, one of the oldest spiritual texts in existence, he noted references to 6-month-long nights and days, celestial phenomena, that match conditions near the Arctic Circle. Tilak proposed that the original Aryan-speaking people may have once lived in a northern homeland, displaced by shifting climates, and migrating southward over thousands of years, though heavily disputed. Tilak's theory seeded curiosity. Could the polar regions hold the missing chapters of human myth, memory, and movement? More recently, modern genetic studies have added whispers to the chorus. Traces of Denisovan DNA, from a mysterious archaic human species, are found in modern populations from Melanesia to East Asia, suggesting a forgotten wave of northern migration that no current migration model can fully explain. Even more oddly, haplogroups common in certain Siberian tribes also appear in Native American populations, a biological bridge across the now submerged land of Beringia, which once connected Russia and Alaska in a frozen corridor of life. But what if Beringia was not just a passage? What if it was a place to settle, a lost continent of sorts, now drowned and frozen, yet once stretching wide enough to house entire cultures? We return again to the idea of the flood, not just of water, but of cold. As Ice Age glaciers shifted and melted, the rising seas did not only swallow tropical coasts, they cut off the north, drowning the ancient roots, burying coastal settlements beneath waves and permafrost. The question becomes not whether people lived in the Arctic, but how much they knew. Some theories suggest ancient polar civilizations may have possessed advanced sky knowledge, star cycles, solar worship, and perhaps even early navigation techniques based on circumpolar constellations. Inuit and Sama cosmologies, for instance, are rich with celestial imagery, the northern lights as ancestral spirits, the stars as moving beings, the sky dome as a layered realm of travel. Could these stories be echoes carried across millennia? Even the idea of Atlantis, often tied to the Atlantic or the Mediterranean, has been speculated by a handful of fringe theorists to refer to a polar land, a place of light and cold, a homeland that fell not into fire, but into frost. Of course, mainstream archaeology is cautious. The Arctic is a difficult place to dig, and preservation of human structures is rare beneath layers of shifting ice. But every year, as the permafrost melts and glaciers recede, new evidence emerges: stone tools, carvings, even ancient wooden structures locked in frost for 10,000 years or more. The past is thawing, and as it does, it challenges our sense of direction. We are used to thinking of time as vertical, digging deeper to go back. But perhaps time is latitudinal too, stretching toward the poles, hiding its oldest pages where we least expect them. What if the Arctic is not the end of the world, but its beginning? As we contemplate this theory, not as dogma, but as dream, we must hold it gently. It is not about rewriting all of human history. It is about remembering that history is incomplete, and the North, quiet, vast and unrelenting, may yet reveal its secrets. There is something poetic about the idea that the cold preserves what the fire forgets, that memory can be locked in ice, waiting patiently for the warmth of human curiosity to return. So we wait, and we listen. To the groan of glaciers, to the winds that have blown for 1,000 generations, to the quiet between snowflakes. In that hush, we hear the echo of ancient feet walking across ice, a lullaby of cultures lost not to conquest or collapse, but to the slow glacial pull of time. And as we turn south once more, away from the cold and toward the sea, we step not out of mystery, but deeper into it. For now we return to the language of myth, where memory and imagination dance, and where ancient lands like Atlantis and Lemuria still shimmer in the collective dream of humanity. Sometimes the stories that last the longest are the ones we never meant to take literally. They live in song, in firelight tales, in half-forgotten lullabies, passed from mouth to mouth for so long that we forget where fact ends and imagination begins. But what if some myths are not inventions, but echoes? Echoes of places that once were, before time swept them beneath waves, ice, or jungle, leaving behind only memory softened by age. Tonight we drift into that space, the space where myth becomes ancestral memory, where the impossible begins to sound familiar, and where the Earth's lost lands still shimmer behind the veil of legend. We begin with the most famous of all, Atlantis. First described by Plato over 2,300 years ago, Atlantis was said to be a powerful island civilization beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a place of vast wealth, sacred geometry, and advanced knowledge. According to Plato, Atlantis fell out of balance, grew arrogant, and was punished by the gods, disappearing in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, it was dismissed as allegory, a parable for hubris, a philosopher's invention, but the story endured, not because of its facts, but because of its pull. And as we explored the world's oceans, uncovering ruins, submerged cities, and sunken coastlines, the idea of Atlantis began to feel less absurd, more like a metaphor with teeth. Some theorists pointed to the Minoan civilization on Santorini, destroyed by volcanic eruption and tidal waves. Others looked to Doggerland, a now submerged region between Britain and Europe. Still others searched the Caribbean, the Antarctic, or even the Sahara. Yet perhaps the most important thing about Atlantis is not where it was, but why so many cultures remember something like it. In flood myths across the globe, the pattern repeats: a golden age, a sudden fall, a world consumed by water, and a memory that refuses to die. In India, the Mahabharata tells of Dwarka, the oceanfront city of Lord Krishna, said to have been swallowed by the sea after his death. In Aboriginal Australia, stories speak of rising waters consuming coastlines that were once home to their ancestors. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of Aztlan, a white island in the east, a mystical origin place long vanished, and in Polynesian lore, there is Hiva, or Mu, ancestral islands drowned by gods, remembered only in navigation chants and starlit maps whispered from canoe to canoe. These are not shared myths in the literary sense, they were never translated, never compared, and yet, they rhyme. What if these stories do not describe the same place, but the same pattern? Ancient people lived by water, they revered it, feared it, and when the seas rose, slowly or violently, they carried with them more than just soil and stone, they carried away meaning, and meaning became myth. This brings us to Lemuria, another land of legend, said to have existed in the Indian or Pacific Ocean, a bridge between continents, a home to an ancient and gentle civilization. The name was coined in the 19th century by zoologists trying to explain how Lemur fossils could be found in both India and Madagascar. Scientists abandoned the idea as continental drift was discovered, but spiritualists and mystics did not. Lemuria became a canvas for the sacred, a land of harmony, intuition, and spiritual awakening, a people who lived in balance with the earth, communicating not with words but through resonance. Long before Atlantis ever rose, of course no ruins of Lemuria have been found, no temples in the deep sea, no inscriptions, and yet the idea persists. It endures not in evidence, but in yearning, a yearning for a time before division, before dominion, before the loudness of modern civilization drowned out the subtler music of the world. Perhaps Lemuria never existed as a place, perhaps it existed as an ideal, a memory encoded not in DNA, but in collective imagination. Still around the Indian Ocean, in Tamil traditions, Indonesian folklore, even Malagasy chants, the story of a drowned land, a lost origin, remains. These myths matter not because they are provable, but because they may be remnants of a deeper truth, that ancient humans remembered something so profound it had to be passed down in symbol, in metaphor, in whispered tales around the fire. If we look closer, we see that even the earth remembers submerged plateaus, coral-covered steppes, crescents of land that once held life. In a world where sea levels have risen over 400 feet since the last ice age, it's estimated that millions of square kilometers of habitable land now lie beneath oceans, entire coastlines erased. Tens of thousands of ancient settlements, built during times of lower sea level, are now underwater, unreachable, unstudied. What if the myth of Atlantis was not the story of one city, but of all of them, all the lost harbors, the sunken villages, the drowned temples and quiet homes where children once played. And what if those myths, passed from voice to voice, survived because truth has a rhythm, even when words change, even when names fade? What remains are patterns, stories of rising seas, of punishment and loss, of longing for what once was and what might be again. Tonight, we do not try to prove or disprove, we only listen to the echoes that live in myth, to the possibility that our ancestors used story the way we use maps to trace what they could no longer touch. And as we leave this world of sunken dreams behind, we carry with us a gentler question: what else might we have forgotten, simply because it didn't survive above water? In the next stretch of our journey, we leave the mythical and return to the measured, to stone circles, star alignments, and monuments that defy explanation, not because they are missing, but because they are still standing, silent, patient and perfectly placed. We now enter the realm of the megalith builders, the architects of an ancient logic we are only beginning to remember. Massive, silent, and unwavering. Megaliths dot the surface of our planet, in patterns that stretch across continents, across cultures, across time itself, from the moors of England to the deserts of Egypt, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the plains of Brittany, from the jungles of Indonesia to the savannas of Africa. They appear, again and again, vast stone structures, built by people we call prehistoric. And yet they knew things we still struggle to understand. Why were they built? How were they moved? And most haunting of all, why do so many of them align with the stars? The puzzle is not just in their construction, but in their consistency. Consider Stonehenge, in southern England. It is one of the most famous megalithic sites in the world, a circle of towering sarsen stones and bluestones, some weighing up to 30 tons, arranged in astronomical alignment with the summer and winter solstices. Each year, the rising sun on the longest day of the year pierces through the heel stone, casting light in just the right direction, a precision built not by accident, but by profound observation and design. Yet Stonehenge is not alone. In Nabata Playa, deep in the Egyptian desert, and older than Stonehenge by over 1,000 years, a circle of stones aligns not with the sun, but with the stars, specifically the belt of Orion and the star Sirius, sacred in many ancient traditions. Thousands of miles away, in Peru, the site of Chanquillo reveals 13 stone towers that act as the oldest known solar observatory in the Americas, tracking the sun's journey across the horizon throughout the year. And in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, though much younger, follows this same logic, aligning with both solstices and celestial events encoded in its very foundation. These are not random coincidences, they are deliberate expressions of cosmic knowledge, and that is where the puzzle deepens, because many of these civilizations, according to modern understanding, had no writing, no advanced mathematics, no telescopes, and yet they built with astronomical precision. They moved stones heavier than modern cranes can lift. They carved granite harder than their tools should allow. And they did it across the globe, in isolation from one another, or so we assume. But perhaps isolation is a myth. Perhaps these ancient people, separated by oceans, were connected by sky, by the stars, by rhythms of light and shadow, by a reverence for the heavens that inspired temples of stone, silent clocks that outlast the civilizations that built them. If so, what were these structures for? Were they calendars to mark harvests and equinoxes? Were they spiritual instruments, tuning space and body with celestial cycles? Or were they messages, for those who would come later, when the skies had changed and memory had faded? Some believe megaliths encoded myths in stone, stories too important to leave in fragile memory. Others suggest they marked energy points on the earth, or charted ley lines, natural currents of force that flowed through land and soul. And still others whisper that megaliths are what remains of a forgotten global culture, one that once spanned continents, now erased by flood, fire, or forgetting. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more profound. Perhaps these stones are not symbols of power, or science, or myth alone, but acts of listening, listening to the world, to the skies, to the turning of seasons, to the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. They did not build to dominate. They built to attune, to be part of something vast and eternal, not in defiance of nature, but in harmony with it. And in that perhaps lies the message that ancient people, far from being primitive, were deeply sensitive to the invisible rhythms of life. They did not need computers, they had observation, they had ritual, and they had time. Time enough to align stone with sky, to feel the solstice in their bones, to watch the stars not as decorations, but as teachers. Now when we stand among these stones, we often photograph them, we measure them, we try to solve them, but what if they are not a riddle to solve, but a feeling to remember, a slow breath, a sacred rhythm, a memory not of the mind, but of the soul? The megalith puzzle is not about decoding stone, it is about reconnecting with the way we once knew the world, with reverence, patience and wonder. And so, as we step away from these ancient monoliths, we do not leave with answers, but with questions sharpened by awe. Who were these architects of silence, and how much have we forgotten of what they knew? Our journey now flows eastward toward the sea, to explore whether ancient civilizations could not only track the stars, but cross oceans. We now set sail, with the wind of wonder at our backs, toward the secrets of the forgotten maritime empires, and the ghost harbors of a world that may have sailed long before the age of sails began. We often think of the ocean as a barrier, a force that separates, a wall between worlds. But for ancient civilizations, the sea may have been something very different, a bridge, a passage, a rhythm to be followed, not feared. In this chapter, we set sail on waters older than memory, to search for the ghost harbors and lost coastlines of forgotten maritime empires, civilizations that may have mastered the sea before history thought it possible. When we think of seafaring, we often begin with the Phoenicians, the Greeks, or the great naval dynasties of China. But what if sailors existed long before these empires rose, long before writing, or bronze, or recorded maps? Across the world, we find signs that humanity's relationship with the sea began far earlier than we believed. Let us begin with the Bimini Road in the Bahamas. Beneath the clear Caribbean waters lies a strange formation, a long linear stretch of stone blocks that resemble a sunken causeway or harbor wall. To some, it is a natural formation. To others, it is a remnant of a lost maritime culture, perhaps even connected to the Atlantis legends that echo across the Atlantic. No definitive answers have surfaced, but the shape, the angles, the placement, they raise questions that refuse to quiet. We drift now across the Pacific, to Nan Madol, a ruined city of islets built atop coral reefs in Micronesia, a place often called the Venice of the Pacific. Its basalt pillars, stacked like logs, form canals, temples, and tombs, all rising from the sea, with no nearby quarry in sight. How were these heavy stones transported? What knowledge of tides and marine engineering did these builders possess? Nan Madol, though relatively recent compared to Ice Age ruins, speaks to a deep tradition of seaborne construction, of people who lived not just beside the ocean, but on it. And yet, even older mysteries lie beneath the waves. Off the coast of Japan, the submerged site of Yonaguni stirs debate. Massive stepped platforms lie on the ocean floor, carved with angles, flat planes, and what appear to be staircases. Some say they are natural. Others insist they are man-made, dating back to a time when sea levels were much lower, potentially over 10,000 years ago. If true, they would represent a civilization of builders who not only shaped stone, but understood the sea. And what of the islands of Southeast Asia, where Austronesian peoples once launched voyages that stretched thousands of miles, settling in Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and eventually as far as Madagascar and Polynesia? Their ancestors were navigating the ocean before the pyramids were built, using the stars, the waves, and the flight paths of birds to cross distances we still marvel at today. We find echoes of forgotten ports and drowned harbors in the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, and even in the Black Sea, where underwater archaeology has revealed ancient shorelines, complete with tools and structures now buried far below the modern coasts. The clues are scattered, fragmented, incomplete, but together they form a quiet pattern that long before written history, human beings were not just travelers, they were sailors. The sea did not frighten them. It connected them. It is likely that entire coastal civilizations now lie submerged, drowned by the post-Ice Age sea rise that reshaped the Earth's geography. Their homes, their harbors, their boats, all taken by the tide. But memory, as always, floats, in Polynesian navigation chants, in Vedic hymns about distant islands, in Mediterranean legends of sunken cities and sea kings. Something persists, a sense that the ocean was once alive with movement, and that its surface carried not only trade, but culture, language, and story. The forgotten maritime empires may not have built pyramids, but they left their wake across the deep, and the waves remember. As we step off the boat and back onto the shore, we do so with a new understanding that the sea is not just a graveyard for lost civilizations, but a library written in currents and salt. And now we move inland once more, not into the soil or the stone, but into the flesh, to see how ancient peoples still live within us. In our bodies, in our words, in the roots of who we are. We enter the realm of genetic ghosts and linguistic echoes, where the past is not beneath us, but inside us. Sometimes the past doesn't live in ruins. It doesn't wait beneath sand or sea. It breathes inside us. Quietly, invisibly, we carry it in our blood, in the syllables we speak, in the shapes of our faces, in the rhythm of our footsteps. Even when civilizations vanish, they leave fingerprints. We begin with genetic ghosts, those ancient peoples whose bones we have barely found, but whose DNA whispers through our veins. One of the most haunting discoveries in modern genetics came not from a lost city, but from a small cave in Denisova, Siberia. There, scientists unearthed a finger bone, just one from a child who lived over 50,000 years ago. She belonged to a species we had never seen before, not Neanderthal, not modern human, but something other. They called them the Denisovans. No ruins, no temples, no art, just a few fragments of tooth and bone, and yet their legacy remains. In modern populations across Tibet, Melanesia, and Australia, Denisovan genes still live. They may help people breathe in high altitudes. They may shape aspects of our immune system. They are the ghosts in our code, the unnamed ancestors no story ever told, and yet somehow remembered by the body. Elsewhere, we find signs of ancient mixing, waves of migration, forgotten peoples, long-lost cultures, who disappeared before they ever drew maps or built monuments, but who became part of us. In Africa, the most genetically diverse continent on Earth, entire lineages have been detected, from ancestors who left no archaeological record, but who still shape the diversity of today's peoples. They are called ghost populations, and they are very real. But it isn't just our DNA that remembers, it is our language too. Some tongues trace back thousands of years, unchanged in their core syllables. A few hundred language isolates exist in the world today, languages like Basque, Ainu, and Burushaski, which seem to connect to nothing else. They are linguistic fossils, survivors of forgotten empires, songs that outlived their cities, and then there are words, simple ancient words, that unite us across continents. The word for mother, for example, often sounds similar across languages, ma, ama, ma, as if the first sound we ever made became a linguistic root, passed on for millennia. Even in the most ancient texts, the Rigveda, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Elder Futhark runes, we find phrases, ideas, structures that seem to echo one another. Was it coincidence, or shared cultural ancestry, long forgotten? Linguists now use computational models to reconstruct proto-languages, hypothetical ancient tongues that no one has ever heard, but which must have existed, based on what their descendants share. These reconstructions give us glimpses into how people thought, felt, prayed, even before writing began. But some things go deeper than words. A lullaby, a rhythm, a gesture of grief, a ritual dance. These live in culture, passed silently, not through stone, but through imitation. You may not know why you sway to a certain drumbeat, or why you cry the way your grandmother did, but somewhere, buried deep, you carry the shadow of someone who once danced beneath stars, long before history gave names to people. So perhaps not all lost civilizations are lost. Perhaps they live in us, in our tongues, our blood, our rituals, our instincts. They are not past, they are present in disguise. And so, as we prepare to leave this chapter behind, we understand something important. Civilizations can disappear from the land, but not from the human story. They may go silent, but the body remembers. And now, as we approach the final curve of this journey, we ask the softest, deepest question of all: why do civilizations vanish, and what does their vanishing teach us about our own time? We now drift into reflection, to explore the fragility of memory, and the inevitable forgetting that follows, even the greatest of human dreams. All that rises one day, must fall. It is one of the oldest truths on earth. Mountains erode, stars collapse, and civilizations, no matter how radiant, fade into the long breath of forgetting. But why? Why do civilizations vanish? Sometimes the end is dramatic. Volcanoes, floods, invasions. But more often, it is quiet. A shift in rainfall, a failing harvest, a generation that leaves, and another that never returns. History often remembers the collapse, but rarely the conditions that built toward it. Slow, soft, cumulative. In Mesopotamia, salinized soil turned once lush farms into desert. In Mesoamerica, deforestation and drought may have weakened the great Maya cities. The Harappan civilization, so advanced in planning and hygiene, may have faded, not in flames, but as rivers changed course, and trade routes dried like ancient streambeds. Civilizations do not always fall by force. Sometimes they simply lose their center, their thread, their story. Imagine a great city. At its height, it hums with life, music in the plazas, markets overflowing, scribes recording the king's dreams. And then a shift, a war, a disease, a belief that things will always be as they are. But nothing ever stays. The people may leave slowly, walls may crack, temples fall out of use, and over time, memory unravels. What was once home becomes ruin. What was once sacred becomes dust. And one day, the trees grow back, the rivers reclaim their beds, and no one remembers the names. But here's what makes it beautiful. Civilizations vanish, but they never vanish entirely. They leave traces, a shard of pottery, a road now hidden beneath jungle, a song in a child's lullaby. They seed the next story, even if they do not know it. When we ask why civilizations vanish, we are also asking, what makes a civilization endure? Is it power? Is it stone? Is it writing? Or is it something smaller, more intimate? The way a mother teaches her daughter to braid her hair. The way firelight flickers on carved walls. The way stars are read not with numbers but with reverence. We often imagine ourselves as immune, modern, global, permanent. But we too live within a fragile thread: climate, resources, balance. Civilizations, like people, are made of many things, but they all require harmony with nature, with each other, with the unseen. And when that harmony breaks, the unraveling begins. But even in that, there is no judgment, no failure. Civilizations are stories, and like all stories, they have arcs. They bloom, they wither, they return. Sometimes in new forms, sometimes only in dreams, and sometimes in stone. The stones do not judge, they endure. They carry memory in their silence, and so we do not mourn the vanished. We honor them, by remembering, by listening, by wondering, and by asking softly, What parts of us will remain? Now we prepare for our final passage, a closing reflection, not on the ruins, but on the earth itself, the keeper of all memory, the quiet witness to every dream and every disappearance. We enter the final chapter, the memory of the earth. The earth does not forget. It holds memory, not in words, but in layers. Every hill is a library, every ocean floor an archive, every glacier a sealed scroll, and every stone, even the smallest, a page torn from time, waiting quietly to be read. We speak of lost civilizations as if they have vanished, but they have not. They have only changed form. A city becomes rubble, rubble becomes soil, soil becomes forest, and in time, the forest speaks the language of stone. The earth remembers everything, not as we do, with names, borders, calendars, but with presence, the shape of a buried temple beneath the rice field, the whisper of brick beneath the jungle root, the sound of footsteps that once echoed in a corridor, now collapsed and overgrown. We often say, it is gone, but the earth says, it is here, just beneath the roads we walk, beneath the fields we harvest, beneath the glass towers and neon lights of our present moment. Somewhere far below, a fire pit still holds the blackened stones of a meal shared 5,000 years ago. A tool lies forgotten in the dirt, last held by hands that never knew paper, but shaped their world with meaning and skill. The past is never past, it is just subtle. Sometimes it speaks through ruins, other times through dreams, a pattern in the stars that mirrors the floor of a buried temple, a lullaby in a forgotten tongue that still fits the human mouth, a name carved into a rock so long ago, even the rock has begun to forget. And yet we are drawn to these places, these forgotten cities, these lost civilizations. Why? Because something in us remembers too, perhaps not with detail, but with instinct. When we stand in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, when we walk the ghost streets of Carol, when we feel the cold air whisper through the hypogeum, there is a moment, brief, weightless, electric, where time thins, and we feel it. Not just awe, but recognition, a quiet, impossible sense that we've been here before, not in body, but in the long memory of being human. And perhaps that is what matters most. Not whether these civilizations built machines, not whether they left gold or empires, but that they lived, that they wondered, that they left traces for us to find, not out of vanity, but because all humans leave something behind, a child's footprint in clay, a circle of stones by a fire, a tool smoothed by use, a doorway facing the rising sun. These are not relics, they are gestures, they are gifts, invitations from the past saying, I was here, I saw the sky, I asked the same questions you ask. What is sacred? Where do we go when we die? How can we live in harmony with the earth? These are not modern questions, they are eternal ones, and the answers may not lie ahead, but beneath, buried in memory, stored in silence, etched into the earth like slow breath. So as this journey ends, as we drift back from the depths of lost time, we do not carry answers, we carry something better, stillness, curiosity, and a deeper reverence for the worlds that came before us. We are not the first dreamers, not the first builders, not the first to wonder what lies beyond the stars or beneath our feet. We are part of a long story, one that began long before we named it, and if we listen carefully, not just to textbooks or ruins, but to the land itself, we may still hear the voices, soft, subtle, patient. They do not ask to be remembered, only not to be forgotten.